these pops, or can I actually?
Yeah, you can drink them. They're real. So you're back on your home turf today, right? You grew up around here.
Yeah, I grew up in Queens.
Yeah.
South Side, Jamaica, Queens. My family still lives in Queens, School of Hard Knocks. It was real true grit and really taught me what it meant, not only to be an entrepreneur, but really hustle. And I'm super thankful to be back. We have an office out in New York. I'm out here about a week a month, and it's always good to kind of get that energy back from New York. I love it here.
So when you think about the neighborhood that you came from, what are the key moments, like when you think about your education and your history and your career, like what are the key moments that really helped you break into tech?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting is I've been very fortunate and blessed with great opportunity. When I was 14 years old, I got shipped out to boarding school on full scholarship.
How did that happen, though?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
I was a part of a program called the Boys Club of New York. It was an after-school kind of enrichment program. I was a basketball player at the time, but they also had this education program where they'd get some of the highest performing kind of inner city youths to take what was, I think, called at the time the SSAT. And if you did well, you can interview for all of these boarding schools. I did it, I did well, and I got a free ride to a school in Connecticut called the Hotchkiss School. And it was there that I actually, the 4 most transformative years of my life. I got to see how the
changed
other
your
half
life.
Yeah, it was next level. I got to go to school with Rockefellers and Fords and all that stuff. And it was the first time in my life that I got to actually see what wealth was. Right?
And what was that like?
What was seeing what wealth was
I mean,
like?
being, but as a child coming from, the community that you came from.
So it was interesting and eye-opening. Few people know, and I say this, like when I was 14 and got to boarding school, I didn't even know what a verb was, right?
Yeah.
And fast forward 4 years later, as I was a senior, I was excelling, right? Honor roll, et cetera. And at that time, I knew that I could compete with the best and the brightest, and I knew what it would take to do that. And Hotchkiss, again, as I said, the 4 most transformative years of my life, and I'm so thankful for that experience.
Yeah. So, like in light of that, I mean, when I look at entrepreneurs like you, I think that often in the tech industry we say, oh, look at Tristan or look at so and so, they've made it, and because they've made it, anybody can make it. But that really just sort of covers up all the different structural inequities in the way that our education system works, in the way that where people live. And so when I look at you, I think of how many other people are there like you that just didn't happen to get that lucky break to go to this school? And how do we find all of them?
Yeah, so again, I'm very fortunate and very blessed. I get a lot from folks saying, hey, Tristan, of course you kind of got that funding. Of course you're well networked. You almost had the silver spoon in your mouth. And, I call bullshit on that. And it's like, walk a mile in my shoes and tell me kind of what that's like. When I moved out to Silicon Valley about 7 years ago when I was 24.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that I heard about Silicon Valley.
How did you decide? How did you make that transition? Because you were in finance and banking before.
Yeah. So after I left university, I was working on Wall Street. I was an oil trader on Wall Street for 2 years. Hated it. It was the worst experience of my entire life. I was a victim of bad culture and knew I wanted to be a creative, a great one. And when I was growing up, I realized I had one goal in life, right? And that was to get as wealthy as possible, as quickly as possible. And I realized that there are 3 ways.
Like that you're honest about it.
I keep it very real about that. There are 3 ways to do it. The first was to be an actor and athlete. That didn't work out for me at all. The second way was to work on Wall Street. Hated it. And I said, damn, I've already exhausted 2 of the 3. The last one was entrepreneurship. And the day that I came to that realization, I said, you know what? I hate Wall Street. I want to get as far away from this place, literally and figuratively, as possible. There's a school called Stanford. I think it's well known for entrepreneurship. I didn't really know what that meant. Let me apply. And fortunately, I got in. And it wasn't until literally I got out in August of 2008 that I saw other 24-year-olds not only making millions of dollars, but fundamentally changing the world. And I knew I wanted to be a part of that, and kind of the rest is history at that point.
Mm-hmm. You said that you had a really important mentor when you were, I think you were working at Lehman, right?
Yeah.
And he gave you a set of advice for your career.
Yeah.
Which was, what was it?
Yeah, so when I was at Lehman Brothers and working in finance, there's a gentleman, his name was Bill Lighton, and he was a managing director, African-American, most senior guy at the firm. And called me in his office one day and he said, Tristan, I figured out life. Sit down, I'm gonna tell you how to live your life. So I'm like, all right, tell me, Bill. And he said, Tristan, you wanna spend the first third of your life learning, right? The second third of your life earning, and the last third returning, right? Now here's a guy, he left Yale when he was 20, he started working on Wall Street. The day he turned 40, he quit. He could have been way more successful, acquired way more wealth, but now he's dedicating his entire life to philanthropic efforts, right? And the reason he kind of ordered it in that way, he said too many people try and put the returning thing before the earning thing, which prevents them from scaling their returning efforts, right? So when I think about my career, I talk about wealth a little bit facetiously, but it's a means to that very end, right? So I think, I've done the learning thing and I continue to. How do I shorten the earning thing to maximize my ability to return and give back to the community, as evidenced by some of the stuff that I'm doing with like Code 2040 and other things as well.
So with the earning part, I mean, you
haven't earned yet, by the way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're on the process, but like, so you left Foursquare. You knew you wanted to do a company. How did you come to Walker and Company and the Bevel line of products?
Yeah. So when I left Foursquare, I joined Andreessen Horowitz as an entrepreneur in residence there. Ben Horowitz at the time said, "Come spend 9 months with us to figure out what you want to do." I spent all 9 months there, and I spent the first 7 months there wasting their time, right? Just chasing things that I wasn't uniquely qualified to do. They were ambitious, but I wasn't going to be the best person to do it. And I said, if I'm going to dedicate the next 20 plus years of my life to anything, I wanted to fundamentally feel like I was the best person in the world to solve said problem.
Yeah.
And it hit me 7 months later. And Ben would always, from the kind of Peter Thiel school of thought, he'd always encourage me to think of the one thing that you believe that few people in the world believe. And I had two. The first really pertaining to culture, right? I had this fundamental belief that all global culture is led by American culture, which is led by black culture in the US, if you think about food and music and dance, et cetera. Yeah. And a big frustration of mine is my living in the earliest adopting region in the world, and it's knowing very little about the earliest adopting culture. That discord makes zero sense to me. And then the second view of the world that I had pertained to health and beauty consumer packaged goods companies. I think they're all doomed for all types of business model and structural reasons. But I always talk about my experience of going to these retailers, going to some shelf that has some dirty, outdated packaging that hasn't been updated for decades, right? And it's a second-class citizen experience that this community shouldn't have, right? And you loop in Latino and Asian folks as well. We're the majority of the country in 20, 30 years, let alone the majority of the world, and we still have this second-class citizen experience. So I felt that there was an amazing opportunity to put those two views of the world together to build a very special health and beauty products company focused uniquely on the needs of people of color and leverage everything that I've learned in Silicon Valley to really reimagine the build-out of a kind of next-generation consumer packaged goods company.
Cool. So, I mean, you've got the shaving product out already. What's coming down the pipeline? Yeah,
so Bevel is our first brand. It's a shaving system that has eradicated the irritation issue for both men and women. In a couple months, we're going to launch a new product to complement that offering, which I'm incredibly excited about. By the end of the year, one thing that we like to do is really invest in R&D. We're only going to make products specifically tailored to our community's needs and solve really acute health and beauty problems that exist in the community. One thing that I get excited about is building things not only for men, but women as well, right? And there's a wide open opportunity to do something really special. One thing that really frustrates me is when you really think about it, there's nothing more unique in the world than an individual's physiological makeup, right? But there's nothing less unique in the world than the entire consumer packaged goods industry. That's like a very weird thing. You look at any other industry in vertical, there's some semblance of personalization, among other things. And one thing that we can do, we can make product, we can make good product. And I think more and more you'll see from us for kind of future brands and products, kind of that blend of great product, great service, but a little bit more personalization. And we can do that better than any incumbent can.
That's a trend. I mean, we had Emily Weiss from Glossier here earlier this week, and then I think with those types of models like them, Warby Parker, they're kind of bypassing the on-the-floor retail route, and you can do more customization with that as well.
Absolutely. It's, I mean, and this goes back to why I think we're well positioned to do it and the large incumbents cannot, right? It's the combination of blending a merchandising experience online that's beautiful, useful, educational, with an offline experience that does the same, right? And we've been proving that we can do that effectively.
So you recently became a father.
Yes.
How does that affect how you think about work and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so my son Avery is the best thing to happen to me and my wife, hands down. And I've been having this discussion a lot recently.
Yeah.
So the way that my wife and I kind of raise our son, we take him to daycare 8 to 5. I'm at home every day between 6 and 6:30. I always feed my son and put him to bed. And then once he's in bed, I do not go back to work. I have no email on my phone. If anything blows up, people know to call me, right? But I'm very deliberate about that. And one thing my wife and I talk a lot about is this idea of like the third shift, right? That's really advocated a lot in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, where you put your kid to sleep and then you go back to work for a couple hours and you come home and go to sleep. My wife and I always talk about seeing less of that, right? And once you have a kid, what's interesting is a lot of folks really start to focus less on their partner, right? And I don't want to do that. I really want to make sure that we have a strong foundation. Secondly, when he was born, I think we were 6 months out of launch. I took a 7-week paternity leave. I was the first guy as the CEO of the company to really take a paternity leave. And I think that was important for a couple reasons. Number one, sets good precedent for the company. Two, my wife deserved it, right? And three, the great thing about it was the company didn't blow up. If anything, the company did a hell of a lot better with me not there than when I was there.
I think with a lot of entrepreneurs that I meet, especially the first-time ones, they really feel like every minute they're not spending on their company is another minute it could be closer to mortal death.
Yeah.
And what you see with second or third-time founders is that they're more adjusted to the decision making. They're making smarter decisions, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's a question of prioritization, right? I'm incredibly ruthless about my prioritization. And the only things that I care about in this order are my faith, my family, and my work. I don't think about anything else outside of that. And if I am, I'm wasting not only my own personal time, but the people that I care about, right?
Yeah.
And that's the only thing that matters to me, and I am incredibly assiduous about that stuff.
So we talked a little bit about earning. Let's talk about returning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think this is super important. So I'm the founder or co-founder of Code 2040.
Yeah.
Code 2040, we're really trying to change the game in Silicon Valley. Our flagship program, our fellows program, brings the highest performing Black Latino engineering undergraduates to Silicon Valley for internships, and we provide them with all the kind of supplemental tools they need to be incredibly successful. They get networking opportunities, access. They do things like media training, on-air media training. We have tech luminaries come and off-the-record conversations with these kids to tell them what the real is in Silicon Valley. We're in, this summer we're going to have 35 to 40 fellows go through that flagship program. Our first summer we had 5, right? So it's continuing to grow. We have 90+% full-time offer rates. It's working, and I'm incredibly proud of what the team's been able to build.
So yeah, I've had a couple conversations about this with Mitch and Frida Kapor, who've been longtime advocates of diversity in the tech industry, and Mitch had done some backwards math, and he had said, well, if there's 4 million high school graduates every year, and then there's this many that are Black or Latino, and we assume like maybe 10% of them or so want to go into STEM careers. That's like 150,000 students per year graduating high school. And he's like, how do we reach all of them? How do we get to that type of scale? Because when you talk about 40 graduates, I'm like, that's so much smaller than the potential talent pool here.
Yeah, so the Code 2040 Fellows Program is just our initial flagship program, and I'll talk about in a second one thing that we're going to do to reach kind of 5,000 students in the next kind of year and a half or so.
Yeah.
But about this kind of Silicon Valley diversity thing, I think that there are 3 things that can be done to really fix the issue. Number one is recognize that this thing is going to take some time, right? We call our organization Code 2040. That's when the minority-majority flip happens. But it's literally going to take a long amount of time. And I think a lot of the narrative is around how can we fix things in the next 6 months, right? But we have to be realistic.
Or an aggressive, when people want to launch.
But I think it's a bit unreasonable and unfair to the folks who are trying to do some good. So that's number one. Number two, I think it's important to recognize that not only there's an issue, but really understand what the issue really is, right? So one can talk about this idea of explicit bias, right? we think a lot about implicit bias, right? And I'll give you, a perfect example. During our first flagship summer program, we had our fellows interview with some large tech companies. And they were great, right? Like, these kids are incredibly inspiring to me, but they were having trouble getting the full-time offers from the large companies. And what it boiled down to is these kids felt uncomfortable doing the whiteboard interviews, right? Now, is it a function of our kids' inability to perform? Probably not. Is it a function of there might be some implicit bias in the interview process? Maybe. We don't know, but we're partnering with these organizations to really figure it out and share information back and forth, right? So recognize kind of what the problem actually is. And then finally, I think it's going to require broad, not only private support, but also public support, right? One of the books that I've read that has really shaped my thinking is a book called Race Against the Machine. It's an MIT professor, and his thesis really, I think, is as follows. The gap between the rich and the poor is as stark as it's ever been. There is no middle class anymore. And the reason why that gap will continue to widen is because folks at the top are leveraging technology in ways that make them a hell of a lot more productive, and folks at the bottom just are not. So if we're going to inspire a new kind of industrial revolution of sorts that is no longer analog and more digital, we have to give people access to these tools. And one thing that I got really excited about in the past year, and I leave it to the experts to determine the feasibility, is this free community college program that the president had hawked. Now, whether it's feasible economically, I don't know, but if we are to believe that our economy is increasingly digital and no longer analog, we should start to incentivize folks to potentially take courses, among other things, in STEM, computer science, et cetera.
The thing that I worry about is that a lot of these institutions aren't flexible or responsive enough. I talked to Mayor de Blasio on stage here on Monday, and you've got these different, the public institutions are really, really, really important. The California UC, CSU, and community college system is so vital to our economy, and yet at the same time, I feel like the skills necessary to thrive in the tech industry seem to change in a 12 to 18-month cycle.
Well, yes and no, right? So, to go back to talk about the other program within Code 2040, we have a program called TAP, Technical Applicant Prep. Right? We only accept, it's probably less than 10% of applicants who come through our program. So we can actually manage the program appropriately as we scale. But one thing that we realized, in the past year, we had 400 plus applicants or something of the sort. But we noticed each year that roughly 40% of them have all the skills they need to get these jobs, right? But they're just not equipped with the tools they need to actually communicate that value add during the interview process, et cetera. So in partnership with Google and others, we started the TAP program. We're hoping to reach 5,000 plus students, go to them, and really give them all the tools they need to be successful during the interview process. So I think an important part of that scale is kind of collaborating with not only public institutions but private to get to that 100,000 plus number that Mitch and Frida talk about.
Yeah, one other thing that Frida and I did talk about was, in a lot of hiring, I've watched the tech industry for so many years, and when people start companies, the typical path is it's like a music band. You get the gang back together, and then you just go and start the next company. And so a lot of it operates through these informal social networks, and a lot of the best jobs just are never listed publicly. And so one thing that Frida had talked about is just should the tech industry, say, have a Rooney Rule where you just make an explicit attempt to at least interview a woman or a person of color for every position. You don't have to hire. Do you think that's a good idea?
I do it.
Yeah. Oh, you do it. Okay.
Yeah. It's. Our company, we have a company that's majority minority, majority women. They're all leaders, incredible. I love them. I'm very proud of what we've been able to build, but I'm very deliberate about that. I think there are a couple things that need to happen. Number one, it's things like that. Number two, kind of eradicate some of the subjectivity in your process, right? That's everything from eliminating names off the resumes, right? To having a criteria by which people kind of evaluate people during the interview process. The way that we do it, we have 6 values at our company. It's courage, respect, judgment, loyalty, wellness, and we will only kind of judge those applicants based on that criteria. And so there's no semblance of, oh, this person's a really great culture fit. What does that mean, right? If we believe in our values, that is our culture. So let's have an objective criteria by which we judge what culture means. And I think we need to see a hell of a lot more of that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you guys.
So much.
You're welcome.